PGA Nation. We are back, and we are back in the playoffs. We are in the middle, round 2 of the FedEx Cup playoffs, and as our show likes to do, we like to follow the tour. So as we're eliminating golfers as the playoff progresses, we are eliminating drafters as the playoff progresses. So the guest drafter has been performatively the worst drafter this year by the scoring. So we've eliminated the guest drafter for tonight as we go into round 2. It'll be a 3-man draft tonight. You'll have myself, Spencer, and team audience who is coming off a huge win. Not only did the team audience win, they killed everyone with a big Justin Rose draft pick. Great job, team audience. As we always say, team audience, you guys are what makes our show. You make the show run. We appreciate you. And we love that you guys are having a big year and winning a lot of drafts. You got team audience is the king of the draft thus far this year, but there's 2 more weeks to secure that crown, so you got to come through and finish strong. Andrew, welcome to the draft tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Anyone who wants to be team audience captain, we would love for you to step up and volunteer and shepherd the draft along. We will also offer you to choose the draft order because team audience 1, you guys get to pick. It's a 3-man, so the first person to drop a 3-man order in the draft, that will be the order we go with. I will leave it open as soon as we get a 3-man order put in the draft. That is what we will run with. Spence, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Congratulations to the audience. As you talked about, we've been keeping track of this from the very beginning. And with that victory, as you talked about, it wasn't just a victory. It was they destroyed everybody. Justin Rose was a big part of that. But that lineup from top to bottom was really good. It beat everybody. Shout out to Dave. He was second place. Joel, you and I, not prime playoff form to start. You did eclipse me by, I believe, 8 points. But, Dave put together a good lineup, too, with what he had with Spawn, which was actually one of the better guest performances that we've gotten so far this year. But with that victory that the audience did put together, they have now taken the lead over me with 2 events to go. So there's a lot on the line still over these next 2 events.
Plenty of drama to be played out. Maybe we'll discuss doubling the points over the next 2 weeks to make it more interesting, kind of like what the PGA Tour does. So we could have some fun, but we still need the audience to drop an order. Andrew, what order do you want tonight? You drop it in there. You guys get it. Andrew, I'd also ask if you'd like to volunteer to be captain, or maybe Courtney's on. Anyone wants to volunteer to captain the team audience draft tonight, please step up. David, boom, locked it in. Audience going first. Spencer second. I will be going third. That will be the draft order that we will run with tonight. Albert, welcome to the show. How you doing tonight? David, Albert, Andrew, any of you guys want to be audience captain? All you got to do is basically say this is the pick that's locked in once they get seconded as we go. We need one person to just kind of step up and usher the audience draft along. Andrew, Albert, David, one of you guys step up, volunteer. Andrew, we appreciate you. You can be audience captain tonight, making sure we get this draft going. You'll have first picks. You might as well get the fun started. Audience, you guys are on the clock, so if you guys want to start putting nominations in now, get that first pick started, you can do so. We will still give you the course break and everything like that and kind of re-explain the draft for anyone new, as we always do. But since you're picking first, there's nothing stopping team audience from getting some nominations out there. Spence, talk to me. Well, actually, before we dive into the course breakdown, one thing I want to mention about, we were talking briefly before we went in live about how it's a little bit different with these no-cut events and how, Spencer, after day 1, last week, you were doing great. Like your lineups would have cashed all the tournaments, and then your lineup kind of fell apart. It didn't end up as strong as you were after day 1. And what we kind of were highlighting is in these no-cut events, that is actually more likely to happen than it would be in a cut event. Because what happens is if you're killing everything early in a cut event and all your guys make the cut, it's going to be much harder for people to catch you because they likely don't have a lot of 5 or 6 of 6s to be able to get above you on the leaderboard. Whereas everybody has 6 golfers in these no-cut events. So if you have like 4 or 3 guys doing well, the other 3 guys aren't doing well, well, if all of a sudden they have a really big Saturday and Sunday, they're right back in it. Whereas with the cut event, they're not even making the cut, and they don't have to worry about them over the weekend, which changes things and kind of makes more people alive. So, Spencer, anything else you wanted to touch on when you think about these kind of cut events?
I think you said it best. And it's like, honestly, Joel, the lineup that I put together, and I say this as the person who came in last week I guess you were close to me, but I mean, like Dave and the audience steamrolled us at the end of the day. You look at that lineup of mine. I had Batia, who jump starts out to the very front of the pack. Harry Hall, who jump starts out to the front of the pack on that. There was so many pieces that were, I think everybody I had was inside the top 15 at that point when the day ended. And then you just saw one player after the next. McNeely shoots a 6-over. Wyndham Clark goes in the wrong direction. Justin Thomas can't move correctly with it until Sunday. And unfortunately, all of those things transpired. And if you just looked at it at the end of Friday, all those players of mine in a normal tournament would have likely still have made the cut. And there would have been that advantage that I would have been able to have to where I would have had a 6-6 lineup to where people couldn't have caught me. But unfortunately, I continued to move in the wrong direction and everybody put pieces together with it. And, it's a 49-man field this week. Last week, it was a 69-man field. You're getting these really subdued contests as far as the people that are in it. And it only takes one or two things to go right or wrong to really make a move up or down that leaderboard. And I think my lineup was kind of the prime example of the negative of it. But even if you're looking for the positive outlook and the glass half full stance on it, you're never out of it until the very end of this. So, keep looking at those lineups, keep trying to push forward, and just know on Sunday, if everything breaks right for you, you can find a way to cash.
I think the lesson there is at the end of the day with these no-cut events, you just want to, more so than not, go for upside, right? I think a lot of times with these 150-man fields, sometimes you get a guy you think is going to win, you get 2 or 3 big names, and then you go for safety just to get 6-6 to the cut. That's not the case here. It's just all upside. No safety should really matter because safety at a no-cut event doesn't really matter as much. You're trying to get upside. So maybe we learned something. We will find out. But we are drafting tonight. Before we get into the draft, Spence, as he always does, will get us a course breakdown. It's in Maryland, which is a little bit different. East Coast course. Of course, we haven't seen in, 2001, the last time we played an event here. The winner then was like 27 under. I think it was Patrick Cantlay. It is not going to be that easy this week. Spence, tell us what they've done to the course this week.
Yeah, you're going to hear a lot of people talk about how this has moved from a par 72 to a par 70. That alone is just going to make the scoring more difficult. You're going to have 8 less par 5 holes to dive into. You also got a very wet course during that 2021 rendition of the event. So when I looked at this, what I tried to find, and I talk about this a lot on the show, Joel, I'm always trying to find dispersion of scoring marks. And I think from a one-off sample size, that is something that is very dangerous to dive into. Like, you just take that Patrick Cantlay victory at 27 under par. He gained 14 plus strokes putting. I don't think that that's necessarily the expectation that you're going to get week in and week out at this course. You run this 100 times, that might be the most that somebody would gain. And we won't know that until we get more iterations that are played at this course. So what I tried to find in my model is, what were the statistics that allowed that putting to happen? What were the statistics that turned this into this off the tee plus putting sort of a test? And is there anything that changes when you move it from a par 72 to a par 70? So when I looked at this course, there was minimal missed fairway penalty here in 2021. I think the question I would ask everybody, is that going to remain the same? I've heard tournament officials talk about they've narrowed these fairways a little bit. They've added extra rough. I don't know if I necessarily believe that's going to cause this to play substantially easier. I still think we probably stretch into that 18, 19, 20, 21 or under sort of winner. And really where the difference comes into play are just those 8 additional chances on the par 5s that you lose. I think bent grass putting is something that we can dive into anytime you get this northeast bent. That's typically a venue or a skill set that you can dive into a little bit deeper there. And then the last thing I will add, just because there was such a large return in this area, you're going to have so many shots from 175 plus yards. Like, depending on the golfer and the player that we're looking at, like, that stretches anywhere between 40 to, I mean, I've seen some golfers up in that 55, 60% range that are going to be in that distance. And sure, a lot of that comes if you take into account the 4 par 3s that are going to be 195 plus themselves and the 2 additional par 5s where there's long iron play that comes into the mix. But the way I looked at this is, I wanted golfers that could dominate off the tee at some of these longer courses. I wanted golfers that had the ability to pop with their proximity from 175 plus yards. I also wanted golfers that could give me that spike ability that I'm always looking for on specific green complexes. So that's going to be the bent grass quick greens here. If you're looking for comp courses and venues that I think are similar, if you're just looking at the Fazio design, who's the designer of this, Quail Hollow, Shadow Creek have a lot of the same similar qualities I was looking for. The other two that I really liked would be Valhalla. And then if you look at the Kapalua Plantation course to start the year, wide open fairways there, very easy scoring conditions. I think there's a lot of rollover effects between this course and a lot of those that I just talked about.
Oh, all right. There you have it. I haven't seen a ton of golf here, but there's enough information out there to help us make some educated picks and find the guys that are going to have the best chance to score well this week. If case anyone is new to the show, we are having a draft tonight. So as we pull the draft board up, we'll be doing a snake style draft, just like your fantasy football draft. Audience pick is already on the board. Great job, team audience, and your captain, Andrew, for locking the pick in. We appreciate you. Best player in golf right now, Scotty Scheffler, is off the board with the first pick. Again, to wrap up, the reminder goes the snake style draft. So audience goes first, Spencer second. I will go third. I will get 2 picks. So it's a snake style draft. And the audience, you will get 2 with your second and third in a row. The one caveat to our draft is you do need to stay within a DraftKings salary. So you can't just take all the best players. You do need to make sure you can actually afford the lineup that you draft in a DraftKings tournament. Spence, Scotty Scheffler's off the board. Obviously, no surprise there. He's playing great. I guess the quick question is, there be any reason you wouldn't play Scotty this week? And then you're up with your first pick.
I'll pop the question back to you, Joel. He doesn't have Ted Scott on the bag this week. Is there any concern for you with that answer?
You know, it's a good question. A little, but not much. I'm not going to not play Scotty. I'm still going to go play. I mean, yes, it's probably not perfect. It's not as exact same, but didn't he play a tournament earlier this year without him and still maybe won or was still in the top 5 or something? He did really well without him earlier this year. So I don't think it's not going to I'm not, the only thing that's going to change for me is, maybe that one, if I do one lineup in a big dollar entry tournament, maybe I will do it without Scotty. But I mean, I'm not. It won't be because of the caddy. It'd be for other reasons. So no, I'm going to sit back and say definitively, no, it's not going to do anything for me. Not going to change anything for me.
I agree with you with that answer. I almost feel like there's going to be too big of an overcorrection that occurs right now, and I'm always looking for reasons why there's a reduction in Scotty Scheffler ownership, and if that pushes him from 40+% to 30% or whatever that deviation ends up being from it, he is the best golfer in the world. He's the most consistent golfer in the world. I do think that there are some names, maybe more so than some weeks in that $10,000 range that I like, that I will also consider. But yeah, I agree with you. I am not removing Scotty Scheffler from my player pool. He's going to be a name that I'm going to try to be higher on than consensus to begin with. I think he should be the 101 in drafts. I think it was a savvy pick from the audience. And it's unfortunate for us because, I'm completely fine. If we want to double the points and we want to turn this into something that is at the closing stretch here where we all have a chance to win on this, I think this is a great way to do it. But unfortunately, to give the audience the lead and to give them Scotty Scheffler, this is almost like starting with starting strokes at East Lake. They just immediately have a big advantage over us.
That is true. Yes, that is true. But the price is priced up, so we'll see how the audience finishes their roster here with Scotty here at the top. I think the only other thing that I would question, about Scotty, I'm sure everyone heard he went on a little rant. What was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago, about how basically, to sum it up, he was basically I don't really care that much about golf tournaments. I win, it doesn't throw me that much. Basically is what he said. I actually think what's interesting about that is I'm basically comparing that with what Rory did, where Rory kind of went out and made a statement to say, if I play in the first tournament or not, it doesn't really matter. So why would I play in the first tournament? And now he's going to show up this week and play. And then Scotty came out and basically said, I don't really care if I win. It doesn't mean that much to me. Right? There's more important things in life. And I think what I'm diving into is the psychology of these two guys, right? And how Scotty is what my gut wanted to kind of give this wave of caution of maybe Scotty won't care as much because he's going to be wrapping up for next week to go actually try and win the whole thing. And maybe, he won't be bringing his A game because next week's going to his A game. And then I realized I believe him. I don't think he really cares. I think Scotty's just a really good golfer. He's not going to not like. There's no such thing as not trying, right? Like you're going to go out there and hit the ball. You're going to try and not hit it the best possible way you can. Like he's going to go out there and hit it the best he can, just like he did last week, where he almost won. He was right there at the top of the leaderboard on Sunday, and he's going to go out there this week. And the fact that he doesn't care is what makes me think he's going to show up every week because he's just going to play golf, which we know he's the best at doing. So I think, just going to Scotty's mentality, that's why he's so unflappable. Because you're right. I don't think he gets super nervous because he's already done all the things. Like, what's going to happen? He's already been the best. So what's going to make him nervous? What's going to throw him off? It's not like Rory. And maybe that's something that Rory can start approaching now that he's won that career Grand Slam. Now he's starting to check off these milestones in his career. Maybe Rory can start approaching that level of like, I don't really care. I've already accomplished everything. I'm just going to go out there and swing loose and free and going to be, start getting these really consistent results, which we've seen him play this year. I mean, that's what he's been doing pretty much. He had a little bit of a drought after the Masters, but then since then he's been excellent. Well, to get your take, I know I went on a longer rant on that than I thought I would, but do you think there's anything to the psyche of each of those, the top golfers in the world?
I think at Scotty Scheffler's core, and I say this as somebody who's ultra competitive myself on everything that I do. I do think Scotty Scheffler is very competitive. It's almost like he doesn't care as much now because he has reached the pinnacle. And there's going to be moments in time as he gets closer to capturing the career Grand Slam. Majors are going to always mean a little bit more to him than other tournaments. But I mean, we can circle this back to, I don't know if it was, I think it was last year at the Masters, to where his wife was potentially going to go into labor. And he talked about how he was going to leave the tournament even if he had a lead. I'm telling you this without a shadow of a doubt. There's a lot of people who would give that answer and then would actually go play. Scotty Scheffler would have left. And I do think that he does put things above golf. And I think the one thing with that quote that is maybe a little bit misinterpreted is it doesn't mean that he doesn't care about golf. It doesn't mean that he doesn't want to win. It's just at the end of the day, he realizes that not winning isn't, or even winning isn't going to necessarily change his life from where he's at right now. He's super successful. He's made a lot of money. Whether he makes $1 billion more or he retires from golf tomorrow, his aspirations and his goals in life seem to be family first and family above everything else. And I think we're going to get the best version of whatever that is from Scotty Scheffler this weekend. And I do think that when you have that into play, whether it's Ted Scott on the bag or me on the bag, he's going to give you whatever the best is out there. So I still think he's the best player, and there's really no other way to spin that. And if there's a reduction in ownership, I love that fact.
I'll add one more funny thought to this, and then we'll move off the Scotty Scheffler thing. If you think about it, other than the fact that he's just so good and he's winning so much and he's making so much money that it doesn't matter for him, if he was pretty much anyone else but Scotty Scheffler on the tour, not like the best player in the world by a lot, it would make sense for him to go to LIV. Because if you don't really care all that much about winning these tournaments, then just take the bag, get all the money, and go play in those golf tournaments, and then you can be right. But he wins so much, he's probably making as much as those guys just playing on the PGA Tour because he wins every tournament.
Last year was incredible. I forget the amount of money that he put together during this stretch run, but he took down the Tour Championship. He won a lot of the events leading into it. He won an astronomical amount of money. I want to say it was like when it was all said and done, you take the $20 million that he won plus all the additional tournament winnings, like he was $30-40 million. And in that year in total, I mean, I don't know what he ended up getting to, but I'm sure it was like 60, 70, 80 million or whatever the number ended up being. So you are correct. He is making more money than a lot of these guaranteed contracts that these guys got to go over to LIV. And I think at his core, I mean, and this is not a what's right or what's wrong outlook on it. There are golfers who took the money with LIV, and I'm not going to be the one that judges them at the end of the day with it. And they can do what they want. If they think that's their best course of action to support their family, that's what they need to do. Scotty's taken the opposite approach to where he doesn't want to take that money. He wants to play for legacy. He still thinks that that's the route to go. And he win the amount of money that he wins. And I mean, he has solidified himself with this last 2 years as this is one of the most historic runs of golf I can think of, because even when other people have put it together in short spurts during what I would call like the Tiger Woods to now era of it, it hasn't lasted for as long. Like even when Spieth was dominant or Dustin Johnson was dominant, Scotty is dominant in that fashion, but he does it with a statistical profile that is so much more sound than any of those guys. Like Dustin is the one guy that I will say from a statistical perspective, I don't understand how he did not win more, but There's guys like Spieth, and I think the prime example, and I'll give my pick after this, because I think that this is like the one thing that I want everybody to realize here. Take Colin Morikawa. Look at Colin Morikawa's stats. Not that Colin Morikawa was ever necessarily the best player in the world. I think there were people at a certain time period that maybe thought he was as he was winning majors. But if you look at that statistical profile from him, from when he was winning major championships and tournaments to what he is providing right now, he's almost the same golfer statistically. He hasn't caught as many breaks. He hasn't gotten across the finish line. I do think that this little run that he's on right now is worse, but he wasn't immune to those in the past either. It's just that we think of players of how often do they win, of how good of a golfer that they are. And the Tommy Fleetwood conundrum is a whole different topic, because he's having the best statistical profile of a season he's ever had. I always say, like, you can't win until you finally win. Fleetwood is all mental at this point. That has gone beyond whatever statistical profile is. But I do think it's something worth noting on guys like Cantlay and Morikawa. The statistical profile is not as far away as it seems like it is. They're kind of similar golfers to what they were 2 years ago. They're just not getting those victories anymore. And because of that reason, the public is very quick to write those players off. Doesn't mean I'm playing Morikawa this week. I do think he is starting to get into his head a little bit also, but that's just things to remember as we get down on these guys through short stretches of time. But I don't know if you want to say something to that.
I was going to say, to your point, you're spot on. I mean, the only thing I was going to add is you mentioned Dustin Johnson, and there was a time I remember I was comparing Dustin Johnson to Tiger Woods for a short bit, but to the point you made, that run for DJ was like one summer. It was like 4 months. Scotty's now been doing this for like almost 2.5 years. He's just been dominating, and that's the difference. It's like guys have shown spurts of a summer, 6 months. I think even Rahm had a run that was maybe a 3 or 4 month run there where he was winning everything. But that's what they've been, 3 or 4 months, and they remain top 10 guys. Scotty's been the number one guy for like over 2 years, and it really hasn't been in question. So that's where it's different, where he just hasn't kind of dropped from that number one spot for an elongated point time, which is the point that you made, which I totally agree with. But all right, you got your first pick here. Didn't think we would spend 20 minutes talking about Scotty Scheffler, but here we are, alas. Who you go with your first pick?
So when I ran this board, and we're talking about golfers that maybe have not lived up to expectations. I named a couple of them a second ago, and Scotty Scheffler was the number one projected player in my model. I think anybody who runs a model is going to come up with Scotty Scheffler. That's when you know he's really good, Joel, is you always see deviations to models, and sometimes they're as outlandish as you can possibly think of, like where somebody will post a model and Tom Hoagie will be number one in a tournament like this. Like, you don't even get that. And yeah, Persant is correct. It is going to be Ludwig here with my pick. This is a golfer who has underachieved this season, but when I ran the numbers, what I was not expecting to happen is you take Rory and Xander. I was expecting them to be above Oberg. What happened there was kind of up for grabs in my mind. That's not exactly what happened. Like, Oberg, according to my numbers, was very close to Rory, a little bit behind him of what projected price should have been, actually above Xander Schauffele with it. And a lot of that comes down to those key stats that I talked about at the very beginning of you need to thrive off the tee. His distance plays as an advantage here. And you need to be good from those anticipated second shot yardages from 175 plus yards. So when you look at the top 10 golfers of this field that are going to project inside of the top 10 for projected driving and then also weighted approach, there's essentially 3 players that did that. Scotty's one of them. Oberg's the second. There's a third one that I'll save for later on this, but I think this is a prime spot for Oberg. I see his ownership starting to run crazy. I think the answer to that, and I used to be somebody who was scared off by high ownership in these spots. I think the one thing we have to note, yes, it's a no-cut tournament. Maybe you can deviate a little bit further from that. The industry as a whole, like, yeah, I've given the negative end of the answer to where people come up with Tom Hoagie as their number one player. There's also a much more sound put together of models. And I think as an industry, everybody's sharper now. So when a player like Oberg becomes extremely popular, you're not going to be able to play every popular name on the slate, but you're going to have to pick and choose your spots. And I really think that if Scotty doesn't win, this to me is like the second, third favorite on the board. So I'll take Oberg here. I really like his upside for this course. We've seen him at other renditions of the BMW Championship, put together results. I think this is a prime spot for him to potentially turn around what has been a relatively quiet 2025.
Boom. All right. Oberg off the board. I liked him. I actually would have taken him with one of my first 2 picks here as well. So that is a steal. I'm aligned with you here. I think he makes a lot of sense, especially off the tee. He's long. He's accurate. I think it's a really good setup for him. So I'm aligned with you on the Oberg pick. All right. I'm going to pivot here. I'm going to start. We're going to take the best golfers. We're going to get them off the board. I'm going to get on board, I guess. So I want to try and be strategic. I'm not going to get cute. Give me Rory McIlroy here, first off the board. He's another guy who should be to his advantage. We've seen Rory have weeks where he can't keep the driver in play and gets wild, but I think Rory's playing well right now. I like the form. He should off the tee have a big edge on this course. So I think Rory can come out there and get us a really good result. With my second pick, I don't think I'm not sure if I need to take this guy this early. I'm going to wait. I think he gets. Does he get back to me? All right, I'm going to take Denny McCarthy here with my second pick. I like Denny McCarthy a lot this week. And people are going to be like, Denny McCarthy, where is that coming from? The reason I like Denny McCarthy this week, there's some sneaky logic behind it. And that's because he's from this area. And this is more of a local course. He's the only guy in the field that's from Maryland. Denny says it's going to mean a little bit more to him than normal because, it's going to be local. It's people there for him. I think Denny has one of those weeks where he goes nuclear, makes gains 6 strokes putting. He'll be pretty good with the ball striking. Obviously, he's not going to, be great off the tee because he doesn't have the distance to be. But again, I think he's one of those where he can just make a lot of putts and compete this weekend. At 7,100, 7,100 in this field, especially it's not a huge 6K range, is a value. And I think he's one of my favorite value plays on the board this week. So Denny off the board. Spencer, would love to get your take on both Rory and Denny this week, and then you're up with your second.
I don't have a strong take on McCarthy one way or another. He was relatively fairly priced in my model either way. That answer you just gave, though, of wanting that hometown narrative, I'm never really a huge believer of that. If you look back to last year or whatever year that was with Keegan Bradley, when he did this during the playoffs, when he went to the Northeast part and talked about how much that tournament means, and he does this every year at the Travelers, there are certain players that put it together there. So, look, as Matt Burton said, it's a big boy track. He's going to have to make putts. Putting is a prerequisite here if you do want to find success. And for him to be fairly priced when he doesn't have the distance of a lot of these other players. I do think it's interesting because there are different ways that you can get about this track than just pure distance, in my opinion. I think some of this length narrative that this course has been quote unquote lengthened is not necessarily as true as it seems on paper. Really what we did is we took 2 par 5s and turned them into a par 4. Kind of at the core of this course, there's a lot of similarities, and you could even make an argument it's shorter than it was in 2021 for that reason. So if that's the case and you have a putter like McCarthy's caliber, I do think that there is a reasonable upside to be had there. And what I will say about that is the last answer too. It's a 49-man tournament where you're going to have to deviate from the narratives of what everybody's coming up with. Like, this is a 7% owned golfer who's the 36th owned player on the board. That immediately gets you different with any single portion of any single build that you put together. So I don't mind the play. I think that it's kind of savvy in a lot of different ways. Would he have lasted to you? I don't know, but in a 49-man field, I'm all about getting your guy.
Boom. I love it. So that's a Denny McCarthy endorsement, which I am pleased about. All right, you got your second pick here. You got Ludwig off the board. Where are you going with your second pick?
So I like Cam Young. I think Persant is the Spencer Whisperer more so. I'm not going to go with Cam Young here. I don't have a massive problem with him one way or another, but I am going to go with a golfer that is extremely popular. So I talked about there being 3 golfers that ranked inside of the top 10 for me in projected off the tee and approach play. 2 of them, Oberg's season increase on bent grass. Scotty has been a good putter this season. The third one has those negative marks with the putting, which is what moves him in the wrong direction inside of my model a little bit. But I'm going to take Kurt Kitayama here. I really like what we've seen with Kitayama over the last 5 weeks. I once on this show, I think right during this run, Joel swore off ever taking Kitayama again. And really all it took was Daniel Berger being my new kryptonite at this point, that any single time I take Daniel Berger, it seems to go south, where I'm fine throwing Kitayama back into the mix. I think if Kitayama can make putts here, he has a massive upside. I bet him at 60-1 when this board open. I bet him in head-to-head matchups. I'm going to kind of play him in all iterations of the market this week. I think he's mispriced at this total and somebody that presents a lot of upside.
Boom. I love Kitayama as well. He was someone I definitely would have taken if it had gotten back to me. He's definitely in my player pool this week, so I'm aligned with you on that pick there at 7,600. He's a big value. I think this course should suit him. And I said the same thing. I think it was one of those. It wasn't that long ago. It was like within the last month. I was with you. I was like, it's Kitayama. We always get him wrong. He looks better in models and he actually performs. But then the performance and the results started coming, and now I am fully back on the Kitayama train. It looks like are both picks locked in? It looks like Fowler's locked. Is it Vegas and Fowler? I'm going to say yes, Andrew. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to go with Vegas and Fowler for team audience. Vegas is an interesting one. To start the week, I really liked Vegas. I'm coming off him a little bit. One of the reasons why is, he looked awesome ball striking last week. But I was just looking some research, looking back. He doesn't tend to follow that up well. If you look, historically at some of his rounds this year, he takes rounds where he kind of goes nuclear with his irons and doesn't really follow it up with another big round. So he did really well at the U.S. Open, Vegas did. And then the next time he teed up at the Travelers, he lost strokes off the tee. He gained a half a stroke on the approach. He gave you a 36. Now, at the U.S. Open, he gave you a 46. So he wasn't great. He was still terrible around the green and putting. Last week he gained 5 strokes on approach and a stroke off the tee. Just wasn't great around the green either. Obviously you're chasing that ball striking this week. The issue is he can still strike the ball great and maybe still not get you a great result with how poor his short game is. But if you're looking for a guy almost at minimum, he's probably the one you want to play at the close to minimum price. So I can understand. I do like Fowler. I think Fowler's a really good pick. He's trending in the right direction, striking the ball really well. Would love to get your take on both Vegas and Fowler this week, Spence.
I like Vegas. He was somebody that I was hoping to potentially get into my build. I think he opens up a lot of things. And unfortunately, from an ownership perspective, we're kind of seeing that right now. And maybe you end up being correct, Joel, that he doesn't follow up those results. And as this ownership continues to trickle up, it's going to make more of a difficult decision to be had for gamers at this point, just because I think people entered this week thinking he's going to be 4, 5, 6% owned. And the Pat Mayos of the world and people with big platforms have talked about Vegas repeatedly. I've seen the name on Twitter about 1,000 times over the last 24 hours. And when things like that happen and that name continuously hits the market, ownership ends up rising. And I wouldn't be surprised if that even gets into the 15% plus range, just because he's so cheap and the narrative is very quickly becoming ball striking, ball striking, ball striking. We know that Jonathan Vegas can ball strike with the best of them. It always comes down to the putter there. Ricky, I don't necessarily have as big of a take on one way or another. I did bet Kurt Kitayama in a matchup against Ricky Fowler. That was more just of how much I liked Kurt Kitayama this week than any direct take against Ricky Fowler. So I don't necessarily am like anti-Fowler by any sense of the word with that. But as I move us along, Joel, it's hard to do what I'm about to do right now because Scotty is still the chalk of a start. And I think I may have gone certainly like 100% with the most popular build that you're going to find of a non-Scotty lineup. So Oberg, Kitayama, I'm going to take Chris Goddard up with this pick here. I know I was hoping people were going to be worried about his performance last week. We talked about him a little bit on the show. He was picked. I didn't have a massive take of a reason to go against him. I will say that my model deemed him to be a semi-bad course fit there compared to what we get this week. And now that we've gotten this uptick again from him in my model where he shows as a value, like he's 12th in my model at easy scoring courses. He's 13th for expected ball striking at this course. He's 6th when I took all of the ranges that we're going to get this week. I tweeted this out on X talking about when I took all the par 3 ranges, all the par 4 ranges, all the par 5 ranges, and I projected it out and simulated it out to see what golfers were most likely to be the best producers. Chris Goddard up being 6th there really means a lot when if you remove last week's result and you would give him a similar result, all of a sudden this is a golfer that's probably 40% owned at this price tag that we get right now. So I get 21% to lock. This is a uber chalk lineup. I'm going to have to figure out a way to get different somewhere. But I do think that in a no-cut tournament, there are still ways to differentiate yourself at the very bottom.
Boom. All right. Well, I agree. I think, yes, as we mentioned earlier in the show, if there's ever a week to go down to the bottom and take shots, this is the one, because you're going to get all 4 days. And I'm with you on Goddard. I think, it's one of those where people are going to go down on him from a bad result, but I think, we see more of what we've been seeing out of him. And I think it was just maybe a slow start last week more than anything, because he even finished well. So Goddard wouldn't have gotten back to you with your next pick either. I would have taken him in the next third. So there's been a lot of steals this week, which shouldn't be surprising. It's a smaller field, so probably we're on more of the same guys. But every time that you've picked, I've had to rearrange who I was going to take, because all these guys keep getting sniped. So I probably shouldn't have started with McCarthy. I've learned that lesson. But I got 2 more guys I'm going to go with here next, which I'm pretty happy about, and that's going to be Victor Hovland. Victor Hovland to start should be a really good course fit. If you look at the proximity distances that he has, his long iron play, he's probably the best in the field. You get him at 9,200. I thought you could have got Hovland in the higher 9K range. I think it's a good value. If he can not allow his short game to hurt him and can just make some putts, I think he can go out there and even win this week. So I think there's plenty of upside here with Victor Hovland. And I'm also going to take a very overpriced and probably too chalky Cameron Young. He makes sense. I won't be overly exposed to Cameron Young, but at this point in the draft, with Ludwig gone, Goddard gone, Scheffler gone, Rory gone, looking for the guys at the top of the board, I do think he's just in one of those guys in form, playing well at the right time at 9,800. I think he'll make some putts and get a good result. So Cameron Young for me. Spence, would love to get your take on both Victor Hovland and Cameron Young this week.
So if you look at Hovland, if you remove that day one from him last week, he actually put together relatively solid results. He was a name that I backed in round 4 in a matchup against Nick Taylor, where the market moved way too far in the other direction. And by the way, it only won by 1 on that, even with Hovland shooting -4. So maybe wasn't the best fate of Nick Taylor there. But I think that this is one of those buyback spots that you can't potentially get on Hovland, to where most popular play on the board last week, everybody wanted an outright on him. Everybody had exposure to him. Disappoints, takes himself out of the tournament on day 1, shoots himself back into it in some regards over the next 3 days. But because the result doesn't look good on paper, it's going to go a little bit under-owned. Plus, he is difficult to throw into certain builds, depending on how exactly you do it with ownership. I'm not a Cam Young person. I very rarely find myself wanting to play Cam Young. He's inside of the top 20 of my model this week. I understand it's only a 49-man field. I don't have a problem with anybody who wants to play him. You may have seen that there is a matchup out there of Oberg over Cam Young that moved very, very intensely in the favor of Oberg. That was something that we did over at Rotoballer, to where we hit that last night. And I kind of told everybody as we put it in there, this is not an anti-Cam Young take. This is just a golfer in Oberg that I think should be the second or third favorite on the board. And I think that's an argument you could make with the Cam Young thing. And to be honest with you, Joel, with the way that this build is coming together for me, I had not eliminated Cam Young from a contention of a spot that I was considering. I was trying to see if I could get up to Xander. Don't necessarily think I can get up to Xander in a lot of these spots. So unfortunately, that's something that I'm going to have to figure out with it. But no, I think he makes a lot of sense. And then, Hovland's a nice bounce back.
Ooh, I love it. All right. So pick endorsed there. Let me ask you a quick question, because you mentioned Xander. Do you think that Xander is back and regaining that form of one of the best golfers in the world? I'm concerned because we just haven't seen it. Now, he does have 2 top 10s in July, which is recently, but it still hasn't felt like he was really contending in those tournaments. Do you think he's back, or I see you're still looking to play him, or do you feel like there's still some time before we get, peak Xander?
If price tag is not coming into play and we're just saying who are the 4 best golfers on the board, I would probably say Scotty 1, Rory 2, Oberg 3, Xander 4. If you look at ownership, he is the least owned of that group by kind of a substantial percentage. Rory would be the one where he's only about 4 or 5% higher owned. I see Rory at 24, 25. I see Oberg at 27, 28. I see Scotty anywhere between 30 to 40, depending on what site you pull in from. And then Xander's at 19%. We used to talk a lot over the last year, Joel, about Xander at these courses where long iron play comes into the mix. And we've talked a lot about how at those courses, and even I talked last week about no-cut tournaments, that's typically where Xander has his biggest upside. So I think he's getting closer. I do worry a little bit, like you said, he hasn't quite put the pieces together. He finds a round every single tournament to take himself out of it, and then he tries to shoot himself back up on the leaderboard with it. But I mean, kind of as Caitlin just said with this, like the long iron play still there. The off the tee stats are getting better that we're finding. So I don't know. I think he's very in play if he's only 19%.
Boom. I get that. That totally makes sense. As an ownership play, a leverage play, I totally get that. All right. Well, you got about 8K to spend. Plenty of money left. Where are you going with your fourth pick?
This is a tough spot. I'm trying to game theory this of what I think is the best route. And there are a couple players. I mean, let me look to see where this guy's owned. I'm kind of afraid that I won't get one of these two guys. I don't know. Can you give me 1 second on this? I want to see if I have enough money. If you want to talk about something that the audience has said, like we could go to the topic of, I know Matt was talking about Justin Thomas a second ago. I'm not playing Justin Thomas this week. Do you have thoughts on Justin Thomas?
All right, I'll dive into Justin Thomas. Justin Thomas is, here's my thing on a baseline. Justin Thomas' popularity, I feel like he's always just over-owned. Just because people like Justin Thomas, he's a popular guy. He's always probably within 3 or 4 percentage points higher in ownership than he probably should be because of his, he's a likable guy on tour that has a big following. Now, he is playing better, but I'm with you. I'm not on Justin Thomas. At 10K, there's just so many other guys I'd rather spend up in my top tier, whether it's Scotty or Rory or Ludwig. Even Tommy Fleetwood, even though, obviously you can't win, but he can get you a top 5 or 10, which is probably better than anyone else. Cameron Young down here, I just don't, I just don't see the upside right now with Thomas. I mean, if you even look at his recent results, he doesn't have many top 10s. He got one at the Travelers, and it wasn't the most loaded field, and he got 9th. I mean, he was good. Obviously, he won the Heritage and the Choice, but that was all the way back in April and May. I think I'm with you. I think I'm fading Thomas this week.
All right, I'll give us our pick. I don't love the spot that I'm in right now. What I was trying to figure out is could I get up on the board to get anybody that made sense to me? And the problem is I'm falling short with every single name that I'm looking for with the way that I'm trying to do. So I might end up leaving a lot of money on the table. Maybe I'll find a way to make this a little bit different. I'm going to take Taylor Pendrith here, 7,200. I think, unfortunately, this build just continues to get chalkier and chalkier for me. What I do like about Pendrith, though, is he has positive leverage in my model when I do look for upside. You look at how he's performed at BMW Championship courses in the past, 2 top 13 finishes, and a lot of what these BMW Championship courses have is it's always an off-the-tee acumen that you need to look for where distance can come into play. And that's something that you see inside of my model. 2nd off the tee at easy scoring courses, 6th in driving distance, 16th at easy fairways. You take all of those weighted off the tee stats, he's 9th in my model. And then if you just look from a proximity perspective, 18th in this field from 175 plus yards, 23rd from 200 plus yards. You may hear those numbers and say, okay, well, like it's not necessarily popping the way I want to see. Look at where he stands in every other fashion of approach play. You're going to realize that he's actually a much better approach player from those distances. 46 from 100 to 125 out of 49 players, 45th from 125 to 150. A lot of the weighted scoring numbers really like him. And then the bent grass putting and the recent putting makes him a very considerable target that kind of has that 3-tiered approach of what I'm looking for there of distance, long iron play, putting. So I think Pendrith has upside, and I think that's the reason why a lot of people are trying to play him this week. Unfortunately, with that pick, though, Joel, I don't know where I want to go because now I have 8,250 left, and I don't really love any of these spots because I can't get myself high enough to go that Star Scrubs route, and that's kind of what I was looking at before you took Cameron Young. Does a Cameron Young pick make sense? And I probably honestly would have taken Cameron Young if that would have been available to me at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. Pendrith is an interesting one. He was someone who earlier in the week I was very interested in, and I've come off of mainly because of ownership. And it's just
Sure.
I'd rather, he is obviously a dart throw, and if I'm going to throw a dart throw, I'd rather just do a low-owned dart throw. There's the reasons you mentioned he might be a good course fit, but I just don't want to play a chalky Pendrith. But I totally understand in your situation why you'd make that pick. Team audience, great job locking in Brian Harmon. We need one more from team. Is English locked in as well? I like English. Is that locked? Courtney, confirm that for me. English is locked. All right, Andrew. Thank you. Appreciate you, Captain Andrew. I like English a lot. I'll start there. I think English is someone who gets overlooked. I think he's should be closer to a 9K golfer by this stage, the way he's been playing. I think he's going to bounce back from what would be a relatively disappointing showing last week and give you a really good result this week. So I endorse English. I probably won't be playing Harmon myself this week, but I'd love to get your take on both Harmon and English, Spence.
I like the Harmon pick. I mean, we want to talk about golfers that may not have the distance, and I think that Harmon is kind of my version of Denny McCarthy this week, where the public is going to overlook him because of that lack of distance, and you're going to get him at sub 7%. And unfortunately, he was going to be one of those names that I was kind of trying to build around at the very end of this, whether it was like a Harmon or a Vegas, and there's a couple of other names there that fit that. And the audience, unfortunately, has done a really good job of pairing Scheffler with each one of those names over and over again. So I think they're having a really good draft right now. I kind of would say I think all three of these teams are savvy in their own ways. And there's only 49 players. Like, how far can you go off? But trust me, there are some paths you can go down that get really gross really fast. And I don't think anybody's done that so far. And I think most of these picks are players that are either within my player pool or at least names that I am considering.
Boom. All right. Solid draft thus far. You got the most money to spend, $82.50 per pick. How you rounding out your squad with I guess not rounding out. Where are you going with your fifth pick?
There are a couple of names that are very, very close for me. I'm trying to figure out how far up this board I can push and actually make sense with it. So I think for me, with a lot of those names being off the board, it comes down to a Burns, a Spawn, a Fitzpatrick. Those are all names that are on my short list. I'm going to roll with JJ Spawn here. I just think that this is a magical 2025 where he wins a major. He almost won the Players. He's been in multiple playoffs. He continues to find himself when push comes to shove in a lot of these big spots. Might regret not going Fitzpatrick. I do think that this is a decent buy low spot on him after he's another player in that same vein of what we saw with Victor Hovland last week, where everybody wanted to play him. Doesn't necessarily provide the result that you want, 32nd place, and people jump off him at least in some modicum of a fashion there. But I'll go with JJ Spawn at 9,400. One of the reasons why I'm doing that is I do think it makes this build, even though the ownership is higher on Spawn. I think this exact build of an Oberg, Goddard Spawn is going to be more unlikely than by adding Fitzpatrick to it. So I'm kind of just trying to figure out a way to differentiate this as much as I can.
I think that's fair. I agree with you. I think JJ Spawn is someone who's just been underrated all year. 94, the price is getting a little bit up there, but he's giving you no reason not to believe that a great result could come. And at 9,400, he's going to get low ownership, and he can get you that great result. So I think there's upside there. I can endorse that pick for you. I could play JJ Spawn some this week. He's looked really good, especially as of recent. I kind of put myself into a corner here. I don't have much money to spend, so I'm kind of trapped. My first pick is probably obvious. I'm going to take Bud Cauley. Bud Cauley's been one of my guys. He's only 6,300. If you got to go dumpster diving, he's one of my preferred dumpster divers. He got a T14 last week. If you look at the numbers a little bit closer, the reason I really like him is because these proximity distances, these longer irons, he does really well. He should be pretty solid off the tee. It should be a pretty good course fit for Bud Cauley here. Gained 4 strokes on approach last week, gained almost 2 strokes putting. If he can replicate that this week, I think you get another really good result. So at 6,300, I think he's the best player of the bunch down in that low 6K range. And with the last pick, because all I could afford, really, I'm going to take Foxy. I'm going to take Ryan Fox. He has, he's dipped recently. He hasn't looked as good as he looked earlier in the summer, where he won the Canadian Open. He gave you a top 20 at the U.S. Open, a top 20 at the Traveler. Since then, it's been ugly. He went out to the Scottish Open and missed some cut the Open. Hasn't really been gaining strokes. He has lost a lot of strokes off the tee. But he has been doing well with the putter. I think if he can find some of that ball striking magic that he had earlier in the summer, I don't think he's broken forever. I think it's going to eventually come back. If he can find that, he's got 4 days, so we can survive a bad round or two. If he can recover for us by Sunday, have a good round or two, that's all you'll need in this 6-man. So, I probably won't be playing a ton of Fox this week. It's just one of those kind of result of the draft or kind of how it fell, and I got to go dumpster diving for my last pick. But if you're looking for someone who's got upside or you got to take it really low, I think Fox is someone you can take a shot on. How about you, Spence? You any interest in Ryan Fox this week?
Kind of. I think you brought up a lot of good points with Fox. And one of the things with him is the Scottish result where he came in 65th. On day one, he was near the top of the leaderboard, played fine golf on day two, got a little bit worse as the week went on, missed a lot of putts. The short game went south on him. Take him to the Open Championship. He was a projected top 20 scorer in my model through 2 days, ends up missing the cut because everything goes wrong for him with that short game once again. So a lot of those baseline statistics that liked him when we entered the Wyndham Championship, he was one of my favorite plays on the board at the Wyndham. And if you watch what he did at the Wyndham, super hot start to begin Thursday. He gets to the 18th hole. I believe he was 4 under par. And I know this as much as I do, beyond the way I should, because I had him in a season-long league and it was coming to the very end of the year. So I was very tuned into what Ryan Fox was doing. He hit a drive on 18. Might be the worst drive. I haven't actually seen it in person. He hit this thing 130 yards off the tee, straight into a tree, and then he hit his second shot. So if the pin for this example is to the right, he played it to whatever the fairway was to the left. So he's on the wrong hole now. He hits it into the rough. He ends up making a big score there, gets out there on Friday, once again shoots himself near 4 or 5 under. He's going to make the cut. And then he just bogeys 8 holes in the row. And I don't know what went south for him and don't know what happened last week. But you think of these tests where his distance can come into play. He's adequate enough there, and the long iron proximity. There are reasons to like Ryan Fox at this tournament. It's a boom or bust play. It's honestly a play, Joel, that I was considering doing by just leaving a ton of money on the table. I will say that with my pick, what I am going to do is, you said Bud Cauley's your guy down in that range. For me, my ultimate guy is probably Sam Stevens at 6,500. The bent grass statistics look great. The weighted strokes gained total are inside of the top 10 for me. And then he has that weighted putting return that's 8th, and increase with that proximity from 200 plus yards. That sees quite a substantial increase there. He's 14th from 200 plus yards in my model. He's also has those steady climbs that I talked about from the off the tee stuff. A lot of that stems from his distance. So I think he's very quietly being slept on this week. I don't have an outright ticket on him right now. I do have him in some matchups. I just think he's a golfer that should be $1,000 more expensive. And at this point, he's not right now. So I like what we're getting from Sam Stevens at this price. And I like the upside that he presents.
Sam Stevens off the board. I think someone maybe in the chat may have mentioned him earlier. 6,500. Now, this is where you can find, if you got to go down there, who are the guys that have some upside you got a shot? So Sam Stevens, 4 Spence off the board. And the audience locked in the final pick. Of course, a great pick, Andrew Novak. I'll never complain about an Andrew Novak pick. It was great last week with the T6. No reason to think he couldn't give you another good result this week. The price is right with Andrew Novak. They still have him in the 6K range. I thought they do have him at 7K. Okay, so close to the 6K range, which is such a small 6K range account. I really like the audience's team here. I think it was a really good draft. I think all 3 teams are really good. I think this is should be a really fun, interesting tournament and draft. Andrew, who is Brian Flacco? Is he related? Is Joe Flacco's brother or something? If he is, that's awesome. I don't know who Brian Flacco is, but either way, if he's related to Joe Flacco, that's pretty cool. That's a wrap for the draft tonight. It should be a fun week. A lot at stake this week. Not only obviously with the FedEx Cup, but also it is Joe. I figured it must have been. That's pretty. Do you know Flacco's brother, or is that just a random pairing? I have questions now, Andrew. I have many, many questions. But one of the other storylines I think that's big this week is locking in the Ryder Cup roster. A big showing from some of these guys could make a change. I think if Chris Goddard comes up and gives you a win or a top 5, right, it's going to be hard to leave him off that team. I think how guys perform is really going to help finalize that Ryder Cup pairing. So there's a lot of storylines and things at stake this week. It should be fun. Before we get everyone out of here, Spence, let's start with this one. Who are you surprised did not get taken today?
Probably Xander. I considered it multiple times. I think there was different ways that even maybe the audience was potentially looking at him. It's a name that I've seen pop up quite frequently. There's outright tickets on him throughout the space. Understand some of the concerns you have, Joel. I think that that's something that could continue to pop up and plague him for the last couple of weeks. But when you look at the ownership and look where he's at, I'm surprised he's a name that wasn't selected.
I think that's fair. There's 2 names I want to mention here. I think I'm surprised. One, I want to start with Cantlay, mainly just because he won the last iteration. So I thought people would want to go back, even though it does seem like a different setup. And to the point you made earlier in the show, I don't expect him to gain what he gained 13 strokes putting. That's not going to happen again. But I thought maybe someone would want to go back there because of the form. I guess people are going to be scared off of Fleetwood at this point because he can't win. But DFS isn't betting on who's going to win the tournament. Fleetwood gets you top 10s all the time, right? You can still play Fleetwood. You don't need him to win just to play him. So I could add Fleetwood. But the other guy I want to mention, and I think it's one of those things we talk about on the show a lot, is Matt Fitzpatrick. Is it one of those things where it's like, hey, is it that 1 week that wasn't, the great result that has everyone cheered off? Because if you just exclude last week, he's been unbelievable. And I think that's enough good results from Fitzpatrick now to say that right now they got an 8,900. You can still play Matt Fitzpatrick. I don't think he's lost it from the form that he's been in. I think he can definitely get a bounce back at only 8,900. And the ownership looks middle of the pack. And for this field, you're going to get naturally a little bit higher ownerships, but it's not too high from what I'm seeing. What about you, Spence?
Yeah, I think the Fitzpatrick shout-out's a good one. I would also say the Ben Griffin one, just to throw him into the mix here. He's been so good outside of like a 2-week stretch where everything continues to land inside of the top 10 for him. Whether it's a course that suits his game or a course that doesn't suit his game, he continues to churn out these top 10s. I think at some point you kind of just have to close your eyes and play Ben Griffin. And I mean, even with that being said, you can make the argument it's kind of like the JJ Spawn thing to where at 94 for Spawn and 91 for Griffin, are they too expensive? Maybe. But I'm almost just willing to say that these are golfers that if you even get any suppression or reduction of what the ownership should be for them because of that ownership, you're actually creating leverage by going that route. So I think Griffin and Fitzpatrick are probably those 2 guys to where if it was not Spawn for me, that's probably what I was considering. I'll throw Corey Connors into the mix as just like another name that nobody's playing this week. And I'm looking for leverage in my model. He's actually, him and McIntyre are the 2 best leverage plays I have on the board. If you're kind of just trying to find these differentiating names in the field, always something worth considering in a no-cut tournament where there's 49 players.
I think especially if you're going to play one of these big GPPs, that's when they make the most sense because guys, especially McIntyre and Connors, those guys have upside. And especially if they're going to be low owned, I think that's where you can kind of find an edge in some of these bigger tournaments. All right, before we get out of here this week, as we always do, bet of the week. I will kick us off. I've been, because of Scotty and how dominant he's been, I think I won a bet at the Open a couple weeks ago without Scotty market. So winner without. And now I'm kind of into that because, Scotty's been so good. It's like, hey, as long as he's in it and you don't have to worry about Scotty up your tail, you can still get a win. So this week it's without Scotty or Rory, which I like. And the guy I'm betting on is the guy you drafted, Spence. I like Chris Goddard, the winner without. I think he's a guy that's like, if he's dialed in, he has the upside to go out and he doesn't have to win, could be second or third, just has to beat everybody but Scotty and Rory. But you get him at 25-1. I think that's a really good number for him in that market. A guy who, other than last week, who wasn't great, and we have seen just been striking the ball spectacularly. It's a ball striker's course. I think there's a lot of upside in the Goddard play. What about you? What's your bet of the week this week, Spence?
To answer Andrew's question, I would still prefer Patrick Cantlay. I very rarely go down the Cam Young route anymore. Specifically, like, I understand the form looks really good and he does pop in the model and you think bent grass, northeast, distance. He's the best putter he's ever been in his career. Like, a lot of the boxes get checked for him. This is a golfer who has burnt the industry so many times over and over and over again. So is Cantlay. I mean, maybe this is like the bad example to use on that, but I think I would still rather prefer Cantlay there. For me, my best bets probably go in the direction of finding Oberg in matchups, whether that's against a name like Cam Young, which we've moved a little bit on that. Fades of Justin Thomas. I think Justin Thomas is a name that you can take on. I did it with Xander before that price got so exploded out, but like that's kind of like those high-end names there. And then I faded Jason Day this week. I think I'm officially done with Jason Day. I talked about my season long, Joel, and I made a huge blunder last week to where I got to the final week of the season. And if I would have started Andrew Novak, I would have won. I started Jason Day because I can't prevent myself from going down that route. And I ended up losing by about 20 points because of that. So I just can't play the Jason Day game anymore. It's one of those things where our relationship has come and gone. This was a thing of 10 years ago, and I'm living in the past with him right now.
That's really sad to hear because you guys had such a good relationship. And none of us want to see that. We want to see you guys live on and prosper. But we say goodbye. We say goodbye. Just say, I'm with you. You can't play. But you know what's funny? You could, like, he was playing well earlier in the year. You could have played him then. Right now, I'm with you. He's not someone I can get behind either. All right. Well, that is a wrap for the King of the Draft tonight. We will have one more episode next week. We'll probably be a 3-man because of the size of the field again before we wrap up this FedEx Cup tournament, and then we get into the Ryder Cup. So still a lot of fun golf left before football season kicks off in a few weeks. Good luck this week. We need to crown a King of the Draft. Who will accrue the most points? And come back next Tuesday night at 9 o'clock, and we will do it all over again. Spence, did I forget anything?
Well, let me ask you this before we officially sign off. You kind of floated this idea at the very beginning, and I'll post the score tallies entering this week. Do you want to double the points?
I say yes.
Well, I think that is your path to victory, is you have to double the points. So very savvy on your part to find a way to actually put yourself in the contention. But I think for the better of the show, let's do that. We will double the points for these final 2 tournaments. We have lost a man in the contest to begin with, so it's a little bit easier to actually get first right now. It will be the 3 of us. That's how we will wrap it up. And then as we start in the fall, we'll continue these 4-mans back up again.
I love it. It's settled. Tune in next week. Let's get a champion crowned. Good luck.